So it says here that there were mines where children or miners worked in the tunnels, and some of the tunnels could actually only be accessed by like really short miners, or I guess kids, because they were like small tunnels, and there were 7 hills. So that's where the idea for the 7 dwarfs comes from. So Rosie Come Home is the next episode, and in this one, instead of Astro running away, Rosie actually runs away. So we have the theme song play again. Elroy goes to Little Dipper School. Judy goes to Orbit High School, but Jane just goes to shopping center. Like there's no space word associated with that. It's just shopping center, which is kind of nice, I guess. Um, a little refreshing because there's a lot of space words in this. Yeah. So Rosie comes into Elroy's room, and Elroy is upside down in the air using a jetpack, and he's doing this because he's working on his model of the Titan trade towers. He has like a scale model going on in his room. It's pretty big. It's pretty impressive. Several towers going up, and he's using a regular wrench to apply torque to a bolt on like one of these stalks, and he's turning the wrench, but he's doing this while he's completely suspended in the air. So he's kind of got a Newton's third law issue going on, because he should be moving based on how, like, he couldn't get it too tight, like when it's still loose it probably wouldn't be a problem, but just tightening it down, unless the jetpack could move laterally to support that kind of. I don't know how it's working, but Rosie comes in and she's like, your room needs a good dusting, Roy boy, which is a nickname for Elroy, and Rosie basically just quickly rolls through, gives it a once over. She's using like this pre-Swiffer era duster, and it's pretty much as good a job as I would do when I was like 14. So I don't know. I guess it must be pretty bad if she can make it that much better with going through that fast. So Rosie actually runs over Astro with her wheels. Astro's lying there on the ground, and she just completely runs over him, and her peripheral location centers are not working. And then she backs up into the scale model and destroys it, and the whole thing is ruined. So she's clearly got some issues going on, got some glitches going on, and she's like her rear sensors must need eye drops. So Elroy tries to stay positive, doesn't want her to blow a circuit or anything. So he's like, maybe my intergalactic architecture teacher won't notice that he's like 500 floors short on the model. So George comes home from work, and the first thing he's worried about is that the car is still in one piece, because Judy has got her driver's test coming up, and she's been taking lessons, and actually it's fine because Rosie has been teaching her, and George says, "Oh, I never have to worry with Rosie around because she's pretty good." So George goes through the process of coming home from work, of relaxing. He reclines on his chair, and he grabs his pillow and paper, but Rosie runs into him, and it switches the paper and the pillow, so now his head is resting on the newspaper, and he's actually reading the pillow now. And then Rosie actually is going to get his slippers, but she destroys them. She runs over them, and they almost clogged her computerized canister. But George is all broken up about this, because actually his slippers have been under his chair for 20 years. And he says, it took me 20 years to break these slippers in, which is kind of interesting, because slippers are supposed to be comfortable, not really things that you have to like break in. Like I can definitely understand though, like breaking in a mattress, or breaking in slippers, to get it to that level of comfort. But 20 years seems a little extreme, for a little harsh. But Rosie says, "Oh well, got to start dinner now." So, so she goes to the kitchen, but actually, somebody rings the doorbell first. So she goes over and she actually answers the door. And this is something interesting: is she opens the door without knowing who it is. Like they don't have a Google Nest or anything. Like there's no doorbell camera for her to actually know, which is, I guess maybe they just haven't gotten theirs yet. They're a couple hundred years behind. But it's actually the robot named Mac who is at the door, and he is, I guess, Rosie's admirer. Judy calls it robotically romantic, and Mac brings her some high intensity ultraviolets. But Rosie, is dismissive of this because she's still trying to get dinner ready. So she pretty much closes the door in his face, and the door actually cuts the head off of every single one of the flowers. And Mac just starts crying and going away. And he actually sounds like Roadrunner when he moves and when he talks. But, family is like, why would you do that to Mac? You were like saying just the other day that Henry Orbit is robot. Henry Orbit is the owner of Mac. Henry Orbit's robot is the spaciest, right? So Rosie, she just says she's up-fed, and Judy has to correct her because it should have been fed up what she said. So she's kind of all over the place in this scene. So back down in Henry Orbit's workshop, and I guess he's kind of like the handyman of their building. He's working on some high-tech stuff, as a lot of this stuff in this show is. And he's using a normal wrench, pretty much the same one Elroy had, and a screwdriver, because those tools are eternally useful, hundreds of years into the future. And Mac comes back, he's all broken up. We get a closer look at Mac. He doesn't speak words. He just makes, beep sounds and all that. But he's a filing cabinet, and he's mounted on the wheels that you would see underneath like a chair in an office. And he has 4 arms, and the top 2 are just regular wrenches. And the bottom 2 are adjustable wrenches. And he's got a bucket for a head, like upside down. And the bucket handle makes it look like he's always smiling. And he's basically got like a maple syrup tap for a nose, just like something you would put into a tree to get like syrup to come out of it. So Mac is still like very heartbroken, and Henry's like, "Oh, stop crying, short circuit." So the Jetsons are having dinner now finally, and Jane goes to set the table, and she pushes a button that's at her place. All 4, George, Jane, Judy, and Elroy are all set at the table, and the button opens up 4 compartments, like ports, in the table, and the plates and utensils just fly up right out of the ports, and then the ports close and everything lands and the table is set. And that whole thing takes less than 2 seconds. So Rosie comes over to serve their food, and George is, he's excited. He's like, he wants their favorite dish. Rosie is like, "I'll make your favorite dish." So George goes, "Uba Duba Solera Souffle." And this is an interesting name for a dish because Solera means a few things. You might have heard of the Toyota Camry Solera, which replaced the Camry Coupe, or the Talbot Solera, which is kind of the saloon version of the Simca 1307, which is basically a Peugeot. But this meal, actually, it's also a limited edition of a Mitsubishi Magna. But this meal, actually, they never get it because Rosie tricks them. She actually serves Venetian vegetable delight, which is from the planet of Venus, Venusian vegetable delight. So George doesn't get his Solara souffle. It's basically a brown goop, and George says, "I hate this more than anything in the universe." And Jane, makes like yuck. She's got the angry face. Her she says her mom used to make her eat it. It's that bad. And Astro doesn't even want it. Elroy tries to sneak it to the dog, kind of thing. So they're like, man, something's wrong with Rosie. And maybe she totally flipped her microchips or something. But George, he's got to do something about this. So he figures he'll just go talk to good old Henry Orbit about this. And maybe he'll be able to fix something, because he knows a lot about robots. So Henry Orbit is actually on his way to talk to George about what Rosie did to Mac. And he's clearly upset because, your robot can't be mean to my robot. So they come to the conclusion pretty quickly. George explains what happened with dinner and all that Rosie's got some problems, and her behavior is not at all like normal. So they determine that her microchip master cylinder is probably malfunctioning. So Henry Orbit takes out the owner manual disc and puts it in his CD player, which is kind of cool because I remember when owner manual discs came on discs. And it says pretty much immediately the Meccano-made microchip master cylinder must be replaced every 5 years, 25,000 miles, or 50,000 meals, whatever comes first. So at 3 meals a day, 50,000 meals would be almost 46 years. And, if Rosie walks at an average of 3 miles per hour, it would take her almost exactly an entire year of continuous walking to reach that mileage. So George is pretty excited by this quick fix, just replace the microchip master cylinder. And Henry, he says, hold off on your liftoff just a parsec, Mr. Jetson, because they gotta check her mileage, and it's of course not polite to ask a woman her age. So George is like, well, that's no problem. I'll just sneak a peek at Rosie's odometer late tonight while she's offline, instead of just like asking her. Or I guess it's you. They don't really remember how many meals. I don't know if the robot has a record of how many meals, or how many. It probably does have an odometer, because most things like that have an odometer, although there's nothing like that at all. So George is basically, he has to tiptoe through the house late at night, and Rosie is like just standing still in a room hunched over. She's actually in this like kind of like whenever she's alone, she's just like kind of dormant. Just it's a little creepy, but she actually jump scares like when he gets close. She turns around and like startles him and is like, "Do you want a midnight snack?" And of course he has to be like, "Oh yeah, that's why I was up, because I'm hungry." So she gets to feed him more of his favorite Venusian delight, which he hates more than anything else in the universe. And we finally see George getting back to the bedroom, and Jane is like, "George, that took you 30 minutes to check her odometer. What is going on?" But George has to break it down for her. He's like, there was 15 minutes eating more Venusian delight. There was 10 minutes putting Rosie to sleep, which is kind of strange. And then 5, finding out that she's actually 35,000 miles overdue, which means that she has a total of 60,000 miles on this microchip master cylinder. And Jane is like, "Oh, poor dear, she's way, way over." And George is just like, "Yeah, I know," but he thinks that it's because he had to eat more Venusian delight, and he's currently suffering from that. He is not real happy with all that Venusian delight that he had to eat, and he takes some Andromeda antacids to help with that. So it's the next day, and the Jetsons, mainly George and Jane, they go to Robot City, which is like the warehouse for all your robot needs, and they attempt to buy this part, this microchip master cylinder, and they're just like, "What model is it?" And they have to get Rosie's specific one for the model that she's in XB500, and the salesman is like, "That's so old, it's the manual for Rosie, which they were just watching, is basically a collector's item. So, what happens next is Rosie goes to Spacely Sprockets, which is, of course, where George works, and she brings him his lunch, and his lunch is pretty important, and he's always got to have his lunchbox. But George hasn't even gotten to work yet because he's late, and Rosie is worried. Doesn't know that he's actually with his wife shopping for a new robot. So she runs out to find him, and she actually runs over Spacely's foot, and he actually gets hurt pretty badly by this. But she just needs to find George because, she thinks that they got in an accident or something. Why is he not at work? I guess for some reason they didn't tell Rosie that they were going to buy her a new part before they left, and there's no way for them to communicate remotely. So she turns on her employer locator sensor, and I'm guessing that's related to what Orbity did in order to find Astro, just one of these like locate this character kind of thing. And she actually does find them. They're back at Robot City, and this salesman, who is like a classic, Danny DeVito from Matilda-esque salesman with the cigars and all this, the 5 o'clock shadow, he's trying to sell them a newer model, trying to get them a deal, all this talk about these new models, and it kind of does put salesmen in a bad light. And there's a lot of things from the 80s that do this to salesmen, talking about them being greedy and all this. But Rosie shows up and sees them being, talked about, the being sold on all these new models, and the Jetsons are insisting that they, just want a new part. They like Rosie the way she is. They don't want to replace her. They just need the new part. But Rosie is she's understandably confused by all this. She doesn't know what they're doing getting a new robot. She knows that she hasn't been acting her best lately. So her head literally starts spinning, and she runs away crying. She's like, they're going to replace me. This is horrible. So George and Jane finally decide to take a stand against this sleazy salesman, and they leave because he doesn't have the part they need. Back at home, Rosie starts packing up everything she has and is trying to get out of there before George and Jane get back with her replacement. So this confuses Astro and Orbity a lot because they don't know what's going on. So they start crying when they hear that she's going to leave and she's, taking everything. And then Rosie, in order to console them, she actually prints out a note and hands it to Astro. And, Astro says, oh, I got this note now, but Astro and Orbity, you have to admit, they can't read. So the note is totally useless to them, and they just start crying even more. So then Rosie, she's still all panicked and everything. She just leaves and goes down the elevator. So back at work in George's office, he's sitting there working, and Cosmos basically comes in. He's pretty mad because George is actually 2 hours late for work, and I know that Cosmo gets a bad rap for being a boss that yells at George a lot, but he's actually bringing George's lunch to him, which is pretty nice thing for him to do. He's bringing it to himself. Maybe it was just so he could yell at him more, but it's even more touching because now Cosmo is actually, his foot is in a full cast because Rosie ran over it, and so he hobbled into George's office carrying his lunch on crutches just so he could bring it to him. And George takes his lunch. He loves his lunch, and George actually he's going to explain to Spacely why he's late, but he gets a call on the video screen from Jane, and Jane had gotten home, and I guess she found Astro and Orbity with the note, and Rosie's gone. Rosie quit. That's what the note said. So George has got to go. So he leaves work, and I guess Spacely isn't too happy about that. But he probably has bigger things to worry about than George at this moment with everything that happened to him. So we see Rosie out on her own, and the first place she goes is called Robot Employment Company to try and get a new job. They tell her, "Oh, you're too old," because she's a pretty old model. And Android agency, they actually say that we have 20 of you, like of Rosie's model, sitting in their basement gathering moon dust. And this, they say it as an excuse for why they can't hire Rosie, but we just saw that she can dust stuff off. So this is actually like a perfect opportunity for her to be useful, and she could actually dust off those 20 clones of herself in the basement, but I guess they didn't make that connection. So she's still going about town, and she actually hears a news report of an electrical storm front moving in. So she has to look for shelter because it's going to be a pretty bad storm. So she's going down the it's kind of like a Vegas strip. There's all these big hotels and all these stores and everything. She goes past the Nebula Hotel, which has no vacancy. She goes past the Milky Way Motel, which has no room. And, you think of the Milky Way as this big, vast thing with all these stars, but I guess they're all, it's full. That motel is full. And then actually the last one she goes by is the Galaxy Hotel, spelled Galaxie, like Ford Galaxy, and they actually have a no robots sign, so that's similar. That's kind of a callback to the Mos Eisley Cantina. But the storm is rolling in. It starts pouring rain. The lightning is bad. So Rosie, we actually see her in it's kind of like a park, but floating in space. It's like a park with trees and grass and everything, and she's under a tree just covering her head, and she just starts sneezing repeatedly. And this is, our way of knowing that she's cold, and she's not where she needs to be. She's just sneezing. She sneezes like 7 times in a row. And, the next thing we see, George is out looking, and he's in this storm too. He's in a video telephone booth, it's basically a phone booth, except it also has a screen too, which is kind of cool that I guess they just don't have mobile communicators yet. George, he's talking to Jane because they're all, worried about him because he's out in the storm looking for Rosie. And he's like, "Oh man, I've tried all her favorite haunts, honey." And, he just kind of lists off some of Rosie's favorite haunts. The first one he names is the Lubra Coffee Shop, but this is a little confusing because he's standing outside of a coffee shop with a sign that says the Libra Coffee Shop. George also remarks that he tried the Beta Bingo Parlor, and he pretty much every single robot singles bar on the Galaxy Strip there, he's also checked. So he's kind of at a loss, and he's no sign of her. And then we get a quick cut over to Mac and Henry orbit in the building, And Mac apparently was also looking for Rosie. He's all wet, and Henry warns him about getting rust. So, it's pretty desperate the search for Rosie right now. And back at home, George makes it back because I guess they give up for the night, and Elroy misses Rosie, and they're all mad that Rosie's gone. George actually blames himself because of how he mishandled dinner the other night with the Venusian delight. Thought he was maybe a little too rude to Rosie. I mean, he did politely eat a lot of it as a midnight snack, so I feel like that kind of made up for it. But I don't know. There's definitely a breakdown in the communication there. So I guess the note that Rosie left didn't clarify because they're still kind of confused about why she quit. She didn't mention at all that she saw them trying to get her a replacement part, or that she thought she was being replaced by an entirely new robot. So Jane actually has to take out the mantle and cook dinner, and she decides for her first time cooking, and maybe I guess as long as they've had Rosie, she decides to make radar ribs, and they're a little bit too rough. They're pretty much just like a third the size of the ribs from the Flintstones, but they look pretty much the same, but they're way too rough. George can't eat them. And Elroy, of course, now has no one help him with his homework. And Judy, of course, this is the big one. She has nobody to teach her how to drive now, and she really doesn't want to learn from George or Jane. So they all agree that Rosie is special and that they will keep looking because, Elroy needs help with his homework. They need to not eat Jane's cooking, and Judy has got to pass her driver's test. So the next day, it's actually beautiful. It's all cleared from the storm. Rosie's back in the park, and she basically has to she kind of wrings out her head. She dumps it out. It's full of water. And she sees a kid in the park who, to her, from her angle, looks a lot like Elroy. She calls him Roy Boy, but it's the wrong kid. It's pretty clear that she misses Elroy, but, she actually sees a whole family there in the park, and they're all basically Jetsons clones, just slightly different models. And I confuse them for the Jetsons too. I mean, it does kind of shimmer as she's imagining they're the Jetsons, but they still do look remarkably like the Jetsons. So she actually gives this boy his space glider back after it gets stuck, and she's glitching when she's talking. Like it kind of broken record repeats over and over again some of the stuff she says. And Elroy, ironically, is out looking as well, and he finds an identical looking robot, except the eyes are different. They're like a flat bar instead of Rosie's eyes. So he also finds a lookalike that's wrong. So Rosie, she actually puts on a different hat now, and she's left the park. She goes to a cafe and starts working behind the counter pouring coffee. And she basically, her first customer, she glitches and she starts overflowing the cup, just pouring too much. And she's immediately fired. And from when she puts on the hat to work there, from when she's thrown outside the room, it takes 9 seconds. So Rosie actually goes all the way back to the park and under the tree. So now we actually jump ahead in time quite significantly. It's about 2 weeks. And Henry is trying to console Mac now because Mac has now lost his Rosie, and he's like, we gotta continue on with our lives, Mac. We gotta help these residents with their repairs. But it's been 2 weeks, and even the Jetsons have stopped searching. So this is pretty disheartening. So Rosie, meanwhile, she actually got a job at a cosmic car wash, and she's gonna wash people's spaceships by hand, and she's scrubbing the body of this guy's ship, and she actually scrubs so hard that it creates a perfect circular hole in like the bottom, like on the side of it, and you can actually see him through the hole, and it's basically like a Flintstone style spaceship now, where it's like his feet would come through the bottom. And she's all upset because, this is a problem. She gets fired again. She can't do anything right. And now, we're seeing Judy's driving lesson, and George and Astro are both in the ship teaching Judy how to drive because, Rosie's gone, so they figured, might as well do the next best thing and have George and Astro teach her. And George remarks driving a car is as easy as going to the moon, and I guess the moon is one of the easiest places you could drive to in the Jetsons. So that kind of checks out. And then we're she's kind of reckless. Um, she's not she's losing control of typical new driver behavior. If you've seen The Pacifier, you know what I'm talking about. George is like, you're going too fast. He's like, slow up, Um, and I thought that was only said by Dash, but maybe more people said slow up. I thought it was kind of funny, but George kind of has to take the joystick, take the controls, and they pull up alongside the salesman at a stoplight. But this is kind of interesting because you have like a floating traffic light. All the cars, all the ships are floating. There's no roads, and whenever you see, like Back to the Future, they have the space cars, or in Attack of the Clones, they have all the space cars. They never stop. They never have to stop because they can always just, continue on a different level vertically. When you have cars that are stuck in the ground, you have intersections where they can't go over or under the opposite direction of traffic, so they have to stop and let them go. But, here, even with the entire atmosphere to drive through, they still, have to come to a stop. But I guess maybe that's just where they're practicing driving. But the salesman is alongside them, and he offers George a new robot because that's what he does. That's his job. And basically, George goes for it this time, and there's a reason why, and it's because back at home, the house is pretty much a total mess. The Jetsons are hoarders when they don't have a robot to clean up and organize. And Elroy and Astro are like swimming through like all this stuff. Like it's just like they're just stuck in piles and piles of stuff. And he's like, Astro, do you know where Orbity is? And Astro, the first thing he does, he just looks over and opens the dumbwaiter, and even more stuff flows out of it. They're over their heads in this stuff, but Orbity is there, so it actually worked. Orbity was in the dumbwaiter. Astro knew where it was, and they're just like smiling, like that's good. I guess they figured it out, and Astro was actually, it worked. The next thing we see, Jane is trying to do laundry, and she overloads the thermal wave washing machine, and it's kind of shaking violently, and it explodes in a huge blast of suds. And we don't see any clothes. Maybe they were like vaporized, but the whole thing explodes, and Astro, Elroy, Orbity, and Jane all get caught up in this explosion. And to save them just in time, we have the Meccano-made 2000, which shows up, and it grabs them all from the blast, and they're all, wet and sudsy and stuff. And Jane gets immediately upset that they replaced Rosie. But the new robot is here, so it goes to reprogram the washer's solar cycle, even though, the whole thing just exploded. But the salesman is like, you know what? I'll give you a 7-day free trial, because if you don't like this thing in 7 days, then, you don't deserve it or something. So Rosie has become a window washer for a building, and I don't think she has the glitching or the problems on her resume yet, because the boss is like, no glitches, and I maybe he's betting that she can control it, but she's been glitching a lot, and she accidentally cleans his face instead of the window, and because the window is open, and she gets fired right away. So back at home, George, Astro, and Elroy are watching the new Spaceball game. It's on their 3D holographic TV, and there's two outs, and the bases are loaded. It is the bottom of the ninth inning, and Johnny Omega is actually getting up to the plate, and he's a pretty good batter. So they're excited to see what he does if he can win the game. And the new robot, the MM2K, the Meccano made 2000, it just comes over and turns off the TV, and it says it's pre-programmed to monitor solar watt usage for optimum efficiency, and that doesn't really explain why the TV is off, but it's saving them money, saving them energy, which is good. And the new robot explains that it's only allotted 10 minutes of hologram TV per night, which I'm pretty sure means that it just comes with a Quibi's subscription. But the robot kicks Astro out even because it's unsanitary to have a dog in the house for more than 2 hours. And also, it turns out Astro has a lot of fleas, which I'm surprised they haven't taken care of. But Elroy calls the robot a digital dictator because of all these new rules, and they threaten to shut down the MM2K, but it's like, oh no, you can't shut me down, owners. It has a gamma backup generator. So, clearly this robot is getting, out of hand, and it's starting to show that they don't like it too much. But Rosie is in a back alley now. She's left her place in the park, and she's holding a copy of the Daily Orbit newspaper, which is nice that we still support local newspapers. And she's actually holding it over her head due to the rain because the storm is still there. So the next day, the MM2K denies George his lunch, and then body shames him, says he's getting too paunchy, and then just throws him in the elevator, sends him right off to work. And Judy is now supposed to take her driver's test. And she decides, I'll do it for Rosie. Rosie would have wanted me to pass. So this is where we see Judy driving the ship. She's doing really well. And she's going along. She's got the driver's instructor there, the driving exam proctor. And she gets distracted because she sees Rosie is chilling out on the ground, just kind of in that same hunched over blank position there. And this is going to mess up her test a lot. She's, looking around. She starts swerving, because, oh man, Rosie, we got to get back to Rosie. And the instructor is like, please, Miss Jetson, keep your eye on the road. And they're flying in the air. They don't need roads. But she runs a stop satellite, and she loses 25 points for doing that, which is, I'm surprised it's not an immediate failure unless running a stop satellite is only like a warning. She makes an illegal U-turn next, and then that costs her another 25 points. And finally, she loses the last 50 points because she does a power dive without using a hand signal. And that causes her, I'm assuming it's a 100-point test, to fail the test. So they actually land and they talk to Rosie, and I guess Judy explains everything, and they pick her up, and now Judy can't drive because she failed her test. The instructor can't drive because he says it's a flying jungle out there, and he claims that he gave half of those crazy jet jockeys their licenses. And this is kind of funny criticism, driving instructors, obviously they can be really picky, but it turns out this driving instructor isn't that good of a driving instructor, because what happens is Rosie can't drive, she's all glitching and all this stuff. So then the driving instructor tells Judy to drive anyways, because he's still very like panicked and shaken from the power dive. Because if you use a hand signal, then he would have had some warning, and he might be doing better. But she pretty much has to drive because the instructor is like, just drop me off at the next corner. You're passing, so you can assume that if anybody had for whatever reason acted in a similar way to Judy, and forced the pass, even though they lost all 100 points, this instructor would have given them their license anyways. And this would actually rationalize his fear of all the crazy jet jockeys, because none of these people have any business driving, because they all pretty much forced the pass by doing an insane driving stunt that shook up this poor instructor. But this makes for a pretty bad instructor. He might be one of the worst driving instructors I've ever heard about. Definitely worse than Mrs. Puff. So at home, we see Judy and Rosie getting home. Judy's all excited. Everybody's gonna flip their orbit when they see you, Rosie. We've missed you for 2 weeks. So Rosie runs in, and she actually immediately sees the MM2K, and she turns around, runs away crying. And the MM2K takes this as an opportunity to roast Rosie. She's like, that transistorized transient was my predecessor. And that's pretty mean, but it's pretty clear that the MM2K is not a good robot. It's not a good robot. So everyone runs out after Rosie, and she actually made it all the way to some sort of wasteland. It's like under a highway overpass, but there are no highways because they all fly. But she actually goes to a cosmic compactor, kind of like a trash compactor. There's a normal chain link fence around this compactor, just like you would see in the junkyard here today. And it totally has this Blade Runner vibe when you have all this future stuff, but you still have this like old stuff that seems like it should be modernized, like dystopian future sort of thing. And the sign outside on the fence says, no admittance beyond this point, and point is underlined. Usually no is underlined, but she's under a highway, and she goes in to this compactor. So the Jetsons actually follow her in, and I'm guessing Orbity is using his mysterious locator ability that they use to find Astro. See her falling into this giant compactor. It's this giant rectangular hole in the ground with these two giant plates mashing together, and Orbity jumps in after her, and his tiny little spring legs to stretch and keep the compactor walls from compacting. And he's like, hurry, I can only hold it for so much longer. But he's like this quiet, like cute little thing. Like, he's so small, but he's doing this. And like the Jetsons kind of form like a barrel of monkeys chain to pull Rosie out. And, I think that this is quite heroic from Orbity. I mean, he's pretty strong. He could easily jump, like if those are as strong as spring legs are, he could easily jump like all the way to the moon. So they pull her out, and they re-explain everything. And now Rosie is all set. She's back home, when they get home, she runs into this new MM2K, and it's pretty much kind of like the movie Black Panther, where she picks up the MM2K and she just throws it out into space and kills it, because she's got to take back her control, her dominance. So she's regained the throne of being the Jetsons robot. And Judy's like, we're just in orbit to have you back, so the last thing, how we end, Rosie offers the Jetsons some Venusian delight as a joke, which is nice. So overall, not bad. We like the jokes, and now we have Rosie. She came home.
What's your line? Action. Action. Action.
Nothing, 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 nothing.
In southern Germany, they have mines that are small,